When today's guest was first studying early childhood education at the University of Illinois, science didn't seem very interested in children under 3. But she really wanted to understand how the child's earliest years shaped the adult that child would become. Later, becoming a mother herself, she also knew how much energy it takes to be a parent, and she put all of that experience into launching a program that supports new moms and dads. It started out small in Decatur, but it's now used all over the country. She is an author, she does regular commentary on parenting for print and broadcast, and is the founding executive director of BabyTALK. And I'm very pleased to welcome to Illinois Pioneers, Claudia Quigg.
Thank you.
Thanks very much to be here. Well, we'll have plenty of time to talk about BabyTALK, what it is and how it developed. But one thing that I think would be interesting to talk about, and I know that you would like to talk about, is how we think now about babies and their experience. Because I think it is true that over the last couple of decades, we've really changed how it is we think about what's going on right from the point that they're born.
Absolutely. You know, there was a time when babies were viewed as sort of a blank slate that came into the world, and then we would write a personality on that baby. But now we know that babies bring so much into the world with them, with their inborn temperament and many skills and abilities that they use to actively seek out and establish relationships with people around them. And in fact, now we think of the newborn as a much more capable person than we used to, and also a more idiosyncratic person. We see that every baby is as individual and different as you and I are. Mm-hmm. So we know that right from the beginning they have a whole lot more going on than we used to give babies credit for. And then the experiences of the first 3 years of their life really help them to craft the architecture of their brains, because while it's true that they have more brain cells actually than you or I do as infants, their brains are not yet organized in a way that will be sufficient for their functioning, and they need life experience to organize their brain cells. Every experience they have teaches a brain cell its job. And so over the course of those early years, when children are having interactions with people and experiences with the world around them, they begin to set up the way their brain will function, and that architecture is with us then for the rest of our lives. Certainly we learn lots more and we have many more experiences, but there will never be an age that an adult is that isn't impacted by the experiences that he had as an infant.
I know that you live now in Decatur, and you came to Decatur to go to school, to Millikan, mm-hmm. and that's where you got your undergraduate degree. And yes. Then you came to Champaign-Urbana and did your master's degree here. When you went to Millikan, did you go there to study early childhood ed or childhood development?
I went to study elementary ed because I thought that I'd like to teach kindergarten, because I thought it would be a good thing to be there at the very beginning when children were crafting their opinions about themselves. I wanted to be part of that. And so lucky me, I got a job teaching kindergarten, just what I wanted. And the very first day, children walked into my classroom, fully formed human beings, which is not to say that a wonderful teacher of children at any age can't make a great difference. But the difference I was looking to make, I had missed the boat.
Yeah. So you already were thinking that by that time,
yes.
so much had gone on that
mm-hmm.
the focus really should have been shifted earlier. Well, when you came to the U of I and you were doing graduate work, as I said, I don't know I want to make too much of this, but this was at a time when the big focus was on children, say, like 3 to 7, not
yes.
so much birth to 3. Did you find yourself sort of butting up against a prejudice there that said, well, those little ones, we're not really quite so interested in that?
Well, the truth is that the technology had not yet advanced to the point that it is now, that we could see inside the mind of a younger child. And when children are pre-verbal, it's hard to know what they're thinking some of the time. And so it is true that the child development science was lagging behind, sadly, on birth to 3. And I remember so well a professor encouraging me to find out what I could and doing an independent study. And finding an article written by a British professor named Maya Pines. The title of the article was "A Child's Mind is Shaped by the Age of 2." And I was so excited when I found this article because I thought, okay, there are people out there who are really studying this, and I had so much to learn from them, and I still do.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. A lot of the research that has been done just maybe in the last 10 or 15 or 20 years, looking at infants and how they experience the world and how active they are in observing, doing things that you might say were experiments. They're clearly very perceptive, and they're trying to figure out how things work, and to the extent that they can, they're manipulating the environment to try to find out.
Exactly. They're making choices, which is hard for us to imagine that an infant is making choices, but they decide what things to pay attention to, what things to turn away from, what things to pursue. And so you're right, they're experimenting with their environment all the time, and particularly experimenting in interactions with people.
Right. One other really important idea that I'd like to have you talk about is this, and that is that, you know, one of the things that's sort of a commonplace to say that, well, parents really are the first teachers. And then you have to ask, well, what is it that kids are learning? And one of the important things that you hope that they will learn is that they'll be cared for.
You know, there is a group of neuroscientists working at Harvard in a project called the Center for the Developing Child. And what they have found is that the single most important thing from all of the brain research that we can learn is that children have to be in a secure, loving relationship with an adult to lay the foundation for learning in every domain, and to be able to establish any kind of competence in their social emotional life, and also to be able to be successful in school. It really all goes back to an infant having his social emotional needs met.
Well, right at the beginning in the introduction, I mentioned this organization, which is also a model that you started and still do in Decatur, but then has branched out, this thing called BabyTALK. And the talk, T-A-L-K, that's an acronym. So what did the T-A-L-K?
Teaching Activities for Learning and Knowledge.
Okay. And we can talk some more about what it is, but just at this point, in a few words, what is BabyTALK?
BabyTALK is a community model that seeks to cast a net over a group of families that are bearing children and identify their needs and give them support and connect them with the resources that will be most helpful to their family. And every family needs different things.
And this really is, you know, people know the phrase about it takes a village, but I think what impresses me about BabyTALK and how this is intended to work is that it is, in a way, the community reaching out, saying to people, here is this fabulous, wonderful, strange, frightening thing that has just happened to you, and we know that there will be challenges, and we're going to see if we can help you with that. Not tell you how to raise this baby,
Absolutely
but
not.
help you with the challenges, and for every family that's going to be different.
We like to say that we come alongside parents and we join them in marveling over their children and scratching our heads together over figuring out some puzzling behavior and strategizing about how to go forward with their kids. So we come alongside them. In Decatur, we actually work at both hospitals that deliver babies and spend time on the obstetric unit 6 days a week with every family following the delivery of their baby. And we do a neonatal behavioral observation, which was developed at Harvard Children's by Dr. T. Barry Brazelton about 60 years ago. And I actually train communities to use the INBO, as it's called. And it's a time to be with a parent and child and kind of give voice to some of the child's behaviors and elicit some responses so that the parent and we can together get to find out about this child. And parents are delighted, and they see their child as far more competent than they would have otherwise.
And if people are interested in seeing what that's like, if they go to your website, go to BabyTALK, there's a video there, so they can watch one of these, and just right from the moment that the person comes in the room and says, "Hi, how are you? What a beautiful new baby you have," and then goes through some of these informal
Yeah.
assessments of
Yes.
the child.
Yeah. Exactly.
I think it's a great story how this really came to be. Particularly now, you have this organization with a budget of something like $2.5 million, and you have 40 people working with you just in Decatur. People all around Illinois are using this model, and other states too. But when this started, 1986, right? BabyTALK had one employee. It was you. So how did you get started in this?
Well, we began having conversations with people in the Decatur community, from the schools, the libraries, the hospitals, Millikan University, Richland Community College, the literacy program, and I was asking the question, okay, I have 3 small children, and I can tell you it is the hardest thing I have ever done. I've done a lot of things, but this is the hardest. And what are we doing in Decatur to give support to families who don't have all the resources I have? And so we began having conversations, and I actually wrote letters to 70 programs across the United States that were for parents and infants, and asked them to tell us about their programs, but none of them were doing kind of a community-wide thing like we really wanted to do. And our hospital obstetric managers were both at a meeting one time, and they looked at us and looked at each other, and they said, well, between us, we see just about everybody. And that's how we hit on the idea of going to the hospital and being part of the hospital staff, following all the same rules and regulations that apply to every hospital staff member, but being there really to represent the whole community and to assure parents that they had delivered their child in a community that would really care for them and care for their child.
I think that I know that you do have a particular emphasis trying to identify families at risk or children at risk because of family circumstances. But I suppose that's really making the focus too narrow, because even families who you would say would have advantages may have challenges that they have to deal with, and I suppose everybody has a challenge because nobody's born knowing how to be a parent.
Absolutely.
So they hand you this baby and say, here you go, good luck. Then you're thinking, well, what do I do now?
Well, I'll tell you, people with resources who have their own vehicle, who know how to live by a schedule, who tend to take advantage of community offerings, those people can be served without spending a lot of money. We can do a lot for them with a little bit of effort. And families who are at risk because of circumstances in their lives, we have to spend more money to deliver more intensive services to them. But I like what you said about the fact that every family is at risk in one way or another. I like to think of a family whose baby has colic and the baby has been crying hour after hour. It doesn't matter how much money you have in the bank, you're at risk when you are in that kind of a situation. Also, I have noted that we have so many more first-time parents now in their 40s, parents who have achieved a lot professionally and now have taken time in their life to raise a family. And those parents often are used to feeling very competent and in control of their lives, and nobody feels competent with a newborn because we have to learn how to be with that child all over again. So 15-year-olds don't feel incompetent when they hold their babies because they haven't yet learned what competence really feels like. So it's all a big learning game for them. But older parents sometimes struggle with this feeling of new incompetence.
Yeah, I did mention that if people were interested in seeing this newborn encounter that happens between the person who's had the training,
yes,
and who goes in and meets the new mom and the baby, I said, well, if you want to see this, you can go to your website. So we can't show that here, but maybe if you could describe a little bit what happens when that person who's been trained in this model comes into the room and for the first time meets mom and baby.
Mm-hmm. Well, the first thing we say is, tell me about your baby, because we think that parents are really the experts on their own children, and we want to establish that right from the beginning. And parents are so eager to tell us about their baby, so they begin telling us, and if the baby's in the room, which we hope the baby usually is nowadays, we say, well, can I just look at your baby with you? And we look together. and we admire the baby, and we may comment on something like, what state of consciousness is the baby in? Is he in deep sleep or light sleep? Is he alert? Is he a little bit fussy? Is he a full-blown crying state? So kind of getting parents to think together about, well, how long has he been like this? And do you see him moving from one state to another? Because parents begin to feel like they can get a handle on things once they can predict their baby a little bit better. And then we look at some simple reflexes like the grasp reflex and some others, and we always turn to the parent and kind of see what they make of that. And we have a red ball, and we see if the baby can track the ball almost always. And then my favorite part of the whole thing is that we have the baby between us and the parent, and we both call the baby, and the baby always turns to the parent, and the parent just lights up like a Christmas tree.
And does that surprise people that the baby actually knows the voice of the parent?
You know, I think they know it on some level, but to see it is so affirming to them. And so, I mean, we always hear this, oh, he knows me already. It's a very thrilling thing for parents.
Now, when babies are born, there are various kinds of assessments that the hospital staff do. How is what happens with BabyTALK, how is that different from what hospitals would do?
Right.
ordinarily?
Well, hospitals do assessments to make sure the baby's health is okay. That is the primary interest. And the assessment we do, and we don't even really use the word assessment because we don't want to, I had a dad once tell me what score, ask me, what score did he get? Did he get all the A's? So we're observing their baby with them, but we're observing behavior. We want to know what kind of a little person he or she is. And so we're looking at behavior, not at health.
Mm-hmm. Certainly the circumstances into which kids are born are going to go a great way to determining what they become. At the same time, I think we have good research to show that there are some people that can manage to overcome tremendous deficits. We're not exactly sure why, but that there's this concept of resilience.
Absolutely.
And it's something that I know people who study child development are really interested in trying to understand. So being born in a bad situation is not necessarily going to mean that you're going to turn out bad. But I guess what I'm reaching for is the parent-child bond and the quality of love that kids get. Does that turn out to be more important than the situation that they're born into?
It's the most important thing in the world. The relationship that a child has with somebody who's crazy about him, that's his chief asset to take into adulthood with him. And a lot of those stories of resilience that you described, I love those stories. But almost always you go back and there was a grandparent or a neighbor or a parent or an older sibling or someone who really made an investment in that child. And even when the child was in a pretty desperate situation, that investment that somebody made was enough to give him what he needed. It's an art, it's not a science, figuring out how children are going to develop, but we do know that having a loving primary caregiver, even just one, is enough to really give kids what they need.
Well, parenting, I guess, is also an art and not a science.
Exactly.
Because there is no shortage of material for parents to read. There's books, and you do a column, and you do commentaries that are broadcast, and there are tons of books, and there are tons of websites. So I'm sure people, as they're approaching having a baby, are madly reading and cramming for this very important exam, which then I'm sure all that prep kind of goes out the window the first time you say, here you go. But I sometimes wonder if, and I'm sure that you've looked at a lot of books and you've written some yourself, is there something you think that often parents aren't being told in some of the standard kind of parenting books?
I think that parents are not being told that it is both the most horrible and the most wonderful experience you will ever have. And I think that there's just no way for them to take in the depth of either of those truths before they've had their children.
But if people who are watching us would like to, wherever they are, would like to know, is there something like this near me? How can they find out?
Yes, they can call us at BabyTALK indicator, 217-475-2234, and we would be happy to tell them. On our website, which is www.babytalk.org, we have the beginnings of a way to connect people in their community with the program, but we don't have all the information yet loaded onto that, but that's coming. But I can tell you in the WILL area, there are a number of excellent BabyTALK programs, and we would be so happy to connect people with those programs if they don't know about them.
Great. I mentioned at some point a little bit earlier that at least your BabyTALK there in Decatur has a very significant budget, and we certainly know that groups who do kind of social service work have a very tough time. Where does your funding come from?
That's a good question. We have funding from the Illinois State Board of Education, which I'm very proud of Illinois. Many states fund pre-K, 3 to 5-year-old education, but Illinois is really a leader in funding birth to 3 through the State Board of Ed, and through a program called Prevention Initiative, in which school districts and community agencies are funded to do particularly outreach to families whose children may be at risk. So that is a large funder of BabyTALK programs in Illinois. Federally, we are very committed in our country to a model called Early Head Start, that is Head Start for children birth to 3, and it's much more, Head Start is family oriented. Early Head Start is much more family oriented, and our nation has quite a commitment to Early Head Start. And in Decatur, we have an Early Head Start program through BabyTALK as well that enables us to deliver very intensive services to a group of families.
Yeah. I was interested in having you maybe reflect, since you've thought a lot about parenting and you've talked with a lot of parents, and you not only have been a mom, but you're also a grandmother. We often talk we toss off things about, well, how things are not like they were when we were kids. But I think the fact of the matter is, not only have things changed dramatically, say in the last 50, 60 years, but even in the last 20 years, so that we could have people now who are young, in their 20s having children, and they could honestly talk about how, well, things today aren't like what they were when they were kids. How do people deal with that reality of that kind of change, and how the way we live impacts people from the very point that they come home from the hospital?
I understand the sentimental feeling we have about wishing childhood was like it was when we were kids. I understand that. But in truth, I can't buy the concept that families are going to hell in a handbasket, because there are some really great things that are happening in families that I think are a real improvement over the old days. A very significant example of that is the difference in the role of mothers and fathers. 50 years ago, the job of the father was to make money and bring it home, and the job of the mother was to raise the children. And there have always been, 50 years ago, there were very loving fathers, but that wasn't their chief role. And nowadays, mothers and fathers are doing this beautiful job of sharing the task of raising their children in a much more collaborative way than in any time in our history. And I see it every day, and I see how parents are figuring out how to, both of them, adjust their work schedules so that they can both continue to be involved somehow in the world outside of the home, but also make their children a priority. And recently I read that there are estimates from the research that over the last 20 years, which isn't very long, fathers are spending 10 hours a week more with their children than they were 20 years ago. That's a great advantage for children. And so I think that some really cool things have happened. I think that the greatest threat to families now is electronic. You know, when people are not really present because they're plugged into their phone or some other electronic device. So that's a new challenge that I'm confident young parents will figure out how to address for us.
Well, that's really, I guess I hadn't really thought about it quite that way, but it makes me think about the fact that, you know, when I was a kid, nobody talked about work-family life balance. Because that wasn't an issue.
No.
Because in at least in middle class homes, dads worked and that's what they did. Mom took care of the house and that's what she did. And you didn't have to balance because you were just all on one side or all on the other side.
And some families still have that arrangement, but if they have it, more often than not, it's been a thoughtful decision to have that arrangement. It's not that there were no choices. Whereas, so now families have, that's another thing to have to decide about, is what's our family going to look like? And for this period of years, maybe it looks one way, and then in this period of years it changes. But families are being more creative, and I think they're seeing to their own needs for happiness more, and that's not a bad thing.
Yeah. People nowadays, some people at least, talk a lot about the family being a threatened institution. They're worried about it. They're worried about all the things in the culture that they don't like and how those impinge on the family. So there's sometimes some fairly heated rhetoric about the endangered family. What do you think about the future of the American family? Are you worried about it?
You know, I'm not, because of this determination I see on the part of parents to figure out what is going to work for them and their children. I think that we are biochemically predisposed to wanting what's best for our kids. And we have new challenges in every age that would keep us from getting there with our kids. But I just think, I guess I trust this instinct in families to want to work things out. And will families look the way they looked 50 years ago? Never again. They won't. Will families still be a source of strength for kids? I think they will.
Yeah, well, they're at the point where we have to stop. I certainly appreciate you talking with us, and just I feel like saying, you know, congratulations, just because of what you started in Decatur and about how now people are using that all over the place.
Thank you, and there's so much for us to learn every day about kids and families, and I appreciate you sharing that with me today.
Great pleasure, Claudia Quigg. Thanks very much for being with us, and to you all, thanks for watching, and we hope that you will join us again next time for another edition of Illinois Pioneers.